Over the last few years, companies like Vercel have made it way easier to deploy backends for your website. But what about everything else? In particular, what about mobile? Mobile needs backends too, and not just an API that can send a JSON. It needs a lot more. As of today, we have an answer to this problem. Expo, the company that made React Native actually viable, just put out their own deployment and hosting service, which is very interesting for a ton of reasons. We have to talk all about why mobile deserves its own backend, and specifically, we need to go deep on server-driven UI for mobile. There's a lot of cool stuff here. I can't wait to go through it all with you, do some diagramming, and even deploy an app using it. But first, a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is Infinite Red, and if you want to build with React Native, you should talk to these guys. They are the industry React Native experts. While they are paying for this time, they are not paying me to say anything specific, so I'm going to be real with y'all. There are very few people I trust as much as Infinite Red when it comes to React Native. From the Chain React conference to Jamin, their CTO, being one of my first fans and the first person to invite me onto a podcast. Yes, really. These guys, they're deep. They know their stuff. You can take my word for it, or you can look at the huge pile of companies that they have worked with, from Zoom to Mercari to Blue Jeans to Seed, Domino's, and more. They've been helping a lot of companies make React Native work not just okay, but really, really well. Whether you're trying to speed up the development or experience on an old app, you're trying to get your web devs to be able to contribute, or you're starting a new project from scratch, especially if you're building with AI, these guys know their stuff. They're paying for this time slot, but they have not told me what to say, so I'll be real. They are the only people I would hit up if I wanted to build a new app today. Hit them up at soydev.link/infinitered and tell them Theo sent you. I'm really excited about this. The Expo guys are great. Account for some bias because I'm friends with the team, but I've also been very critical of their stuff in the past. They know I'm not going to hold back at all here. We'll see how this all goes. I am excited though. In particular, I'm excited because of the early call out here for server-driven UI in native apps. We're going to give some examples of server-driven UI using the Facebook feed. Hopefully, we're all familiar with what a feed like Facebook looks like. Here we have a couple different types of posts in this feed. We have a photo post, a text post, and a video post. We can even pretend that this is all a real API that we're getting back JSON on. Here's an example of a photo post that creates that. Let's make a video post now. Okay, I'm only going to mock out these two, but you get the idea. We have types of posts. The API responds with an array of posts that has these JSON blobs. So we have a photo post that has all the things that this needs, that renders. We have a video post that's all the things the video needs, that renders. But what if we add a new post type? Let's say it's a holiday. Let's say we are celebrating Valentine's Day, and we know how much Facebook loves their gimmicks. Let's say we have a Valentine's post. It's a new custom type of post. It's only going to exist for a little bit. I'll even draw a little heart. Look at that. I'm such an artist. So now we have this new special Valentine's post. And we make it way simpler. Happy V-Day. Cool. Hopefully we all understand what I've done here. We have a feed that has post types. I didn't make one for text post because I'm lazy. Each of these is a JSON blob that comes from an API, has its own shape for the data that we then have to render in the UI. But how do we actually render it? This is where things get a bit more complex. We need to figure out how this JSON becomes content, but first I'm going to change how we think about this a teeny tiny bit. Instead of the feed having these nice formatted posts in them, pretend they don't. Pretend the feed just has this JSON blob in it instead, and that we literally just fetch and get all the JSON blobs directly. Hopefully we can all imagine how this code works. This isn't going to be a great experience for users, but the point here is that we go to the server, hit the /API/feed, and then it returns all of this data. And now we can render the JSON itself in all of these blocks. Totally fine. But we're not going to just render the JSON. We need to turn this into something. And all of these things are slightly different. In a photo post, we need to have that album layout that shows the multiple photos. In the video post, we need just that one video that uses the video player. So we need to mount that there. With the Valentine's post, we might be doing something entirely different. So if we did this with JavaScript or React code, we could say the photo post has a photo view. That's photos are post.photos. Then it has an author. ID equals post.author. So we have this for photo post, but obviously video post is going to be entirely different. So this video post has a video player. The video player takes in a video URL, which is post.video.url. These are entirely different from each other. There's basically no overlap. And if you think you can write a single component that handles all of these cases, you don't have a real job in FANG companies, because there's just every single PM and every single designer is going to have some weird specific thing you need to do to some specific post type that's going to require that post have its own component entirely. So what happens when we want to make a whole new one? Well, we can do it. We can make a Valentine's post that doesn't have anything special here. Maybe it's just like the Valentine's animation. It doesn't take any props. It's just the thing that's always in a Valentine's post. It has like the text content, text equals post.content.text. You get the idea. So where does all of this code come from? This is where things get fun. When you're using an app, even if you're not using a React Native app, when you're using any application that is fetching JSON from a server, it has to turn that JSON into something you can see. React is one of the ways to do that, but there's a lot of ways to do that. The catch is that you need to have every single possible thing the backend can send you encoded in the app binary to transform it. Because we didn't have a Valentine's post component in our code base, and we get a Valentine's post from the API, it doesn't know what to do with it. So it just doesn't render it, or it renders an error, or it throws, or it tries to stuff it into the wrong shape and it looks wrong. This means that we kind of have a desynchronization on the state between the client and the server. Because if the client is on an old version of the Facebook app and they don't have the Valentine's post binary in it yet, they don't have the component that they can use to transform the JSON into something you see, you're kind of screwed. You don't get to render that if you don't have the thing to render it with. So if the backend changes what types of posts exists or adds more things to the posts, we don't have the code to render it unless you've updated the app. But app updates aren't a guarantee. When you push a new app to the App Store, you have to wait for Apple to review it. You have to wait for them to approve of the changes and then deploy them, which can take days, sometimes even weeks. After that, you have to wait for the app update to roll out to users. And that can take a wide range of times. We'll even ask, obviously I have to do a T3 chat plug, you guys understand. How long does it take for most of my users to be on the latest version of my iOS app after I release it? So the first week, 20 to 40% of users might update. First month, 50 to 70, and then 2 to 3 months in, maybe you're at 90%. This is pretty accurate from my experience. It's bad. And this sucks. Because if you decide, let's say a month before, that you're going to do a Valentine's post, even if you start working on your Valentine's post in January, you're kind of screwed. Because doing that in January isn't going to save you if only 50% of your users are going to be on the latest version in time. Like, what? It's just not viable. And hopefully this makes you realize we need something better. The problem here, and this might be controversial, the problem is that we're not returning the right thing from the server. What we return from the server is just the data, and we hope that the app has the right thing it needs to transform that data into something the user sees. What if instead the server returns something different? If we take this photo post blob here, for example, actually we'll take the Valentine's post because that one will be even easier. Let's say for the Valentine's post, instead of returning text, date, author, we return header. And this is a div that says Valentine's Day. We'll even string wrap it. Let's say for the date, we return div, sure. Let's say for the body, we'll do div image source equals / fancy animation dot svg. You get the idea. What if instead the server returned what should be shown instead of what data should be transformed into what is shown? You could even send other formats, but JSON is a standard, it's what everyone uses for almost everything, but you could return XML or HTML. These are the patterns that something like HTMX is built on. Instead of sending JSON back and forth between the client and the server, what if you just sent the actual thing that changed on the page? We've been doing this on the web for a while, like finding different ways to not have to send data to the client, but instead send what actually changes to the client. But it's more important on mobile, because on mobile, you're stuck waiting sometimes months for your users to actually be on the latest version of your app. So if you have a feature that you want to show to the user that isn't in the version of the app that they are on, you're kind of just screwed. And that's why pretty much every big company has moved their mobile apps over to a server-driven UI model. And that is what server-driven UI means. It means that instead of the server sending data to the app to then transform into UI using the code in the app itself, Instead, the server sends the UI to you, and the app just renders what the server tells it to. Crazy paradigm. I understand why this is not something we all just understand. We expect our app to just have everything you could ever see in it. But as mobile apps change more and more over time and new features are introduced to products and we actually want to get them to those apps, we need strategies like server-driven UI to make this happen. If you've been around for a while, this might sound somewhat familiar. This might sound quite a bit like server components. Instead of the server sending JSON and all of the JavaScript to render it is on the client, the server can send what the UI should show you instead. This is also part of why React Native is really strong for these situations. Because despite what all of the anti-React Native people will tell you, React Native is native. So if you have the box on your phone that is your native SDKs, think of this as stuff like the native button on iOS or the tab bar or all the native text rendering features, all of those things. If you're building a native iOS app today, there's a decent chance you're using SwiftUI for it. SwiftUI is a layer that commands the native SDKs on iOS to do things. All React Native is just a layer on top. So React Native is just telling SwiftUI what to do, which then tells that native layer what to do. Is it an abstraction? Sure, but it's only one level higher than SwiftUI is. Usually they're actually going to call some core UI kit stuff and the old Objective-C code, but they are moving more and more over to Swift. The point is that React Native isn't rendering a web view. React Native isn't controlling everything. It's not the alternative to writing a native app. It is just a way to tell native what to do. So instead of writing Swift code that tells the native SDK to go do something, you're writing React Native code that tells core UI kit to tell the native SDK to do something. What about the server-driven UI? Let's say we have a native app that's written this way. So we have our API over here. This API returns something in the shape that I just showed you. It says what buttons go where. This will get thrown to some conversion layer. And this conversion layer takes whatever the API sent and transforms it into the different core UI primitives that are necessary to actually render this on your device. That conversion layer is something that you probably have to write yourself if you're building a native app. But if this is just React Native and the API returns server components, you don't have to go build all those parts yourself anymore. And a big part of why big companies have been able to run circles around small ones on mobile is because they have the teams to build all the necessary pieces to do server-driven UI. But server components are just the standardized version of that for everyone, which is really cool. A lot of the server component patterns came from Meta because they were building similar things to do this on mobile. And a lot of their lessons are what they've encoded into server components and now server components with React Native. It's really, really cool. The hack most people have been stuck with for a while is called code push. So if we change this to be JSON APIs, then we need every single thing this React Native could possibly render to be in this bundle. We have to have every post type. We have to have Valentine's post. We have to have video post. We have to have picture post. We have to have all the post types. The way code push works is we take this binary and we can swap them out ourselves and hope that Apple doesn't notice or care. So we can swap this in, and then once the Valentine's post is done, because it's no longer Valentine's Day, we can just delete it from the binary and be fine. Maybe we add another here, like April Fool's post. So we have to have these two different layers that we have to work hard to keep in sync. We have to make sure the JSON API never returns something that the current binary version doesn't have. And we have to move to the right version and have all the code in our native app to make sure that the right set of all of these things is in it at all times to transform that JSON into the right thing on your phone. Or we can just use server components. And this is why the pattern is so cool. So let's actually read more about it. Expo has actually introduced API routes that can be used to create endpoints for your app, as well as secure environment variables and static generation for your web pages, all built with universal React server components. This all worked great locally, but deploying it was hard. Agreed. We've historically recommended deploying Expo websites and universal API routes to traditional hosting services that are focused only on the web. But these services for websites traditionally don't integrate with the platform's native app face. Yep. Yeah. New versions of your server may need to be deployed while new versions of your native app are being pushed to app stores. Different versions of your native app may need to have their requests routed to a different version of your server so that you don't send a changed API to an old client. Observability of servers for critical metrics such as feature adoption by platform become more important for Expo native apps. Yes. Now EAS Hosting solves most of this. Let's just make an app. It seems pretty easy. And while I am not necessarily the smartest, we'll see how well I can deploy a mobile app from scratch. Create AES CLI, create a new Expo app, pnpm create Expo app at latest. Cool. Expo deploy demo. npm run web and just run the web version. But you could also run iOS or Android by using these different commands. And you can either scan using the Expo app on your phone, so you can have a preview on your phone as you're working without having to have all the crazy dev stuff set up, even on Windows. Or you can just run it with the simulator on here if you have that set up already. So here we have a basic Expo website that would also work on mobile. Has the tabs. You know what? Let's see it working on mobile. I'm curious. npm run iOS. Now I have a fake iPhone here that has the same exact app. Look at that. Pretty cool, right? Let's get it deployed. Expo export -p web. Static render enabled. Cool. So we're going to get an actual static site for this. Then EAS deploy. Creating a preview URL. Now we're hosted. That was hilariously quick, actually. I'll paste the link if you guys want to see it. Yeah, we're now live on the web. See if I got the test.expo.app. Did I get that domain too? I did not. Still super cool though. Oh, when you're ready to deploy to prod, that's how you do it. Nice. So you actually have a different prod deploy command. Prod deploy is done. Does this URL work for others? It might be a bad cache. Yeah. Cool. Bad cache. Okay, now it's working. Pretty cool. And what does the server return on these routes? It said it was static. We'll actually take a look. We go to Explore. It's not doing anything when I switch to the tabs. Are those even different URLs? Oh, they are different URLs. So did it load all the context? It's not doing another network request. What does this return? Let's take a look at all this HTML. Explore and get a fresh start. Does it include the other tabs is what I'm curious about. It does not. Okay. So that means the other tabs must be included in the JavaScript that gets sent down, assuming in this content. So we can, again, command F in here for get started. No? Entry. There we go. Cool. So this entry bundle is where all the different routes are being stored. What's interesting here is we load the HTML from the server, but then we load all the different potential states via the JS that we can hop between. This is a pretty traditional SSR'd SPA, which go watch my video about all the different rendering strategies if you want to better understand what any of those words mean. The quick TLDR is it means we run the React code on the server, in this case during build, to generate the HTML page. That's what you see initially. And then further navigations are done via the JavaScript that has all the different states. But we still have every state the page could be in the JS. And that's the big difference between this and something like server components. When you have an SSR'd single page app, you have to have every state the app can be in your binary. So the actual JavaScript that's on the device that can turn the APIs into the thing the user sees, 100% of that has to be in the JS layer. But it's also worth noting this is just the web app that got exported. We can also export this to iOS and Android and have similar behaviors and patterns, which is really cool. But none of that is what I'm here for. What I am here for is server components. So let's look into how to do that. Typed routes, React server functions, true. We'll give an example of something that feels very server-y to prove that this works. So let's make check lines of code.tsx. Get clock. This will take in nothing. What we're going to do is, I was going to tell cursor, run the following bash command and get the result. This runs in Node, by the way. Cool. The point here, and the reason this is so cool, is that we are getting this component down from the server. And I could even put a suspense around this to showcase it better. So if we suspense this, fallback, and there we go. Look at that. It loads immediately, and then the text comes in from the server, and it should also work on here. I might have to relaunch. Almost certainly actually have to relaunch. npm run iOS. Window location href is not defined. This is required for server components to work correctly. Let's see how we're supposed to handle that. Back to the docs. Doesn't seem to specify that in these docs anywhere. I have a quick solution. I'm going to text Evan. He already read it. Fingers crossed, he'll give us a good answer. Okay, go to my app JSON. Cool. Apparently it is this field. Now we're talking. Look at that. That's so cool. Obviously the format is garbage, but the thing you have to realize that we're doing here that makes it so cool is we are running code on a server. In this case, the server's my computer. That code is running a bash command, in this case, the count lines of code command, getting that data on the server, transforming it into a text element, and then sending that down to the client for it to render. So if instead of this being text, I wanted this to be something else, I can do that here. If I wanted to handle iOS and Android differently, I can do that here. If I wanted to change how the post renders entirely, if let's say this wasn't get clock, this was get post, I could render posts entirely differently depending on what I put here. The alternative way of doing this, the way we used to in the past, is we would make an endpoint, we would run the command, we would get a result, we would format it as JSON, we would send it to the client would download that JSON, it would transform it using the React code that it hopefully already has, and then render it. Now you just do it. Do you know how cool it is to exec something in Node and then just return the result as formatted JSX? It's so cool, and it enables something that wasn't possible for small teams before. You do a more practical example where we query something from database here. Let's set it up actually. I just had a hell of a time getting this all set up, so I will say relatively confidently, this isn't something you should be shipping in production yet, but when it works, it's cool as hell. So I want to show you guys what the future of full stack mobile with server-driven UI in React Native will hopefully look like once all these errors and edge cases are handled. So here we now have a fake blog. It's not really a blog. It's meant to be a feed, and the feed has posts. Posts can be one of two types. It can be a text post or it can be an image post. These are all just JSON in this post directory, by the way. So we have two that are text posts, and we have one that's an image post. We know because it has an image. I could have given them a type field here, like type image post. And in production, you should, but this is not production, right? It's meant to prove a point. I have my render posts function that is a view that has post.map, and it maps each of the posts to my post view component. The post view component is the component that takes the JSON and turns it into something you see. So you could imagine this running on the client. You'd write something like this that takes the post, and depending on which type it is, it returns it. The difference is this code is running on the server. So this sends down what the mobile app should render instead of sending it the data that then has to transform into what it's supposed to render. So here we choose if there is content in post, then we return post.content as text. Else, if there's an image in the post, we return the image instead. We could even give these all custom views so they have text, style, font weight bold, title. Do the same down here. Thank you, cursor. Hot reloading is hella broken, I've noticed. First time it always fails. There we go. And now we have text posts and photo posts. And it's not just on mobile either. I can npm run web, and we'll see the exact same behavior here. I can even go to the network tab and see what's going on. What we'll see here is the response. I'm assuming they're using streaming here. Oh, they're not. Interesting. So where does this rest of the content come from? Aha. Comes from this default.txt import. And here we see the stream of updated content. We get this bundle for React Native Web that is telling it what JS it needs to render, including the text as well. So this is telling the browser, here are the things you need in order to render what I'm about to give you. And then it gives us this weird JSON blob that has children and style tags, all these things in it, because this is what it's telling React to then go render. This isn't accessing the JSON blobs. This isn't hitting APIs. This isn't doing anything. This is just a destructured version of what the UI should be showing that it can then combine with these JavaScript functions and things that it might have already even imported in order to turn all of this into what we see in the UI. What's cool here is if we go look through all of the JavaScript that's shipped to the client, it's not going to include anything that is specific to what we wrote over there. So if I go back into the view post thing, if we always gave this a custom text, like instead of putting the title, it's image post. Actually, wrap that in a string, image post. Now it will always say, it should always say image post, but again, the hot reloading is broken. Now it says image post. And if we were doing this the traditional way where that was being rendered on client, we'd be able to go into the JavaScript and find image post in it. But if we go here and we hop into the entry bundle, which is where everything is bundled, image post. Interesting. How did that get in here? Evan, you're not tree shaking your server components. How about use server on top? Will that fix it? That fixed it. Cool. Since I didn't put use server on top, the Metro bundler assumed it could include all this code. Make sure you put use server on your things with this. Yeah. But the point here is that we're getting true server components, which means this code only runs on the server. And the blob that I was showing before that came down later, this default.txt, this blob is a server component. This is the JavaScript necessary to render whatever we're about to show it, and then what we actually want it to render. I think that's really cool because now you can have a helper TSX file, like one of these post renderers, that can change the types of posts that it renders whenever. And the mobile app doesn't need to be updated in order to get the new post types. You could even skip shipping the bundle to iOS or Android entirely. This will significantly reduce how often you need to ship updates, possibly to the point where you're only shipping updates when you make meaningful routing changes or when you add new native dependencies. It's so cool that I can just render the right thing on the server, not worry about what the client has, and it will just output the right thing. There were a ton of gotchas on the way here, as you guys saw with me suffering through all of this. Cut to a highlight reel of my pain if you're down phase. Let's just make an app. It seems pretty easy. This is where things get fun. Evan, window location href is not defined. This is required for server components to work correctly. Do we even need that? Not this again. Based on this, we're going to re-record. Sad. Phase, here's where you would cut to. And it all works. Well, it did. What the fuck broke this time? Or when I said cut to this point, phase, we're going to redo that. Why? Evan. I feel like I'm going insane right now. Okay, cut to here. But the results speak for itself. It's super cool. And if we can get this to a point where it's really stable, even as much, if not more so than something like Next.js, this should become the default for how we write apps. It's almost irresponsible because if you have competition that is using this tech and you're not, now you can't move anywhere near as fast as they do. You shouldn't limit the quality of your app experience to the speed that the App Store is willing to push out updates. You shouldn't limit the new experiences in your app to 50% of your users for the first month. We shouldn't be this stuck in this horrible way where we have to wait for Apple to let us change our app. We shouldn't have to do all of that work on the client in the first place. If the server can tell the client what to render, things get way more flexible. And it almost makes sense that Expo's original goal was to build a better web browser, and now they are here. Obviously, Expo is not a web browser. It's a way to build better native applications using React Native, but now it kind of is. But it's not rendering a web view with a div. It's rendering a native view with a native text component. It's so cool, and I'm genuinely really hyped about what's going on here. The fact that I can now deploy this in a way that isn't hellish is super cool. You know what? Let's give it one last deploy. I'm curious. See how well the web component side works. Not this again. No such module tabs.html. Definitely has access to the tabs. Yeah. Deploying all of these things together, still not quite there. I tried. Yeah. This is early. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but all of the pieces are coming together. Would I ship a new service on this right now today? Absolutely not. This is not ready at all, but I am confident in the Expo team being able to get us there. They've done a lot of things in the past that I just did not think were even close to viable. I still remember when this shipped. This is the Expo dev menu. This was one of the biggest reasons to use Expo's mobile app, but if you had native things you needed like payments or camera access, stuff that wasn't in their bundle, you couldn't really use the Expo app to dev. So they came up with the crazy idea of making all of the parts for the Expo app dev experience accessible to install into your application. I was one of the earliest people trying this back in would have been mid 2021, over a year before they even announced it. And I did not think this would ever be usable, ever ready to ship. Now it's used in probably half or more of React Native apps, and it's great. The fact that you have a menu you can open up either here using hotkeys or on your actual phone when you're working on the app with the dev client that you ship to your devs, and that every team can build a custom dev client with all their needs with this menu to do debugging, disable, enable fast refresh, reload, inspect elements, all in a menu that runs on top of your app. This felt like unobtainium. This did not feel like something we could actually get to at any point in the near future. Now it's just part of the Expo experience. So while the things I just ran into might seem insurmountable, they might seem like there's no way this will ever be stable, I promise you it will be. They are going to get there, and I'm really excited to see it once again, once all of these parts finally can come together. Until then, don't ship Expo server components in EAS deploy and prod just yet, but be excited for this future because it is genuinely really exciting. How cool is it that I am in a React Native project, reading from my file system, mapping across all the promises to get the JSON data, and then rendering it in different view types before any JavaScript gets to my device? That is a really bright and exciting future, and I hope that we can get there soon. So I just got a text from Evan over on the Expo team that they fixed a few of the bugs, but they just saw this, thought it was brutal, and they are currently in the process of fixing all the issues. So there's a good chance that by the time this video is out, those issues have already been fixed. I will pin a comment letting you know if they have or haven't. Know that you're seeing the earliest version of this stuff, and by the time you're watching this video, there's a very good chance these things have already been fixed. As I said, the team is on it. Evan goes hard about these things, and if you bring up an issue that exists within Expo, the speed at which he will respond and then the speed at which he'll follow through and fix it it's the reason I like them so much. They're one of the fastest moving teams I've ever worked with. Pretty excited to see what they do. I'm sure there's a lot of Flutter comments below, but if you want to talk about React Native, let me know. Really like the stuff, and I'm curious how you feel about it too. Until next time, peace nerds.